Hello, this is the Bible History School. In our Bible History School, we summarize the words of the 66 books of the Old and New Testaments and upload them as short videos every day. It makes it much easier to understand the text and overall flow of the Bible. The Old Testament has 39 books and 929 chapters. The New Testament has 27 books and 260 chapters. And the 66 books of the Old and New Testaments have a total of 1,189 chapters. It takes 1,189 days to read one chapter of the Bible every day. If you just read the Bible, there are many parts that are difficult to read and understand. So, we summarized the key contents of each chapter and created short videos. It is much easier to understand the content if you watch the appropriate videos together than if you just read the sentences. We made it into easy sentences, middle and high school students can easily understand. Not only students but also ordinary people who have a hard time reading the Bible due to their busy daily lives. It is good for them to meditate on one chapter of the Bible every day. I hope you will encourage your children, parents, friends, and neighbors to read the Bible. In addition, the Bible History School is currently serializing Revelation and World History with great acclaim. We would appreciate it if you could subscribe together. Your support and encouragement have given us a lot of strength in producing Bible a Day in Revelation and World History. Thank you very much. Genesis chapter 1, Creation of Heaven and Earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and all things. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep. But God's Spirit moved over the waters, preparing life. God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and God saw that it was good. He separated the night from the day, and that was the first day. On the second day, He made the firmament and separated the waters above and below, and called it sky. On the third day, God separated the land from the sea, and caused grass to grow on the land and trees to bear fruit. On the fourth day, He created the sun, moon, and stars to govern the day and night. On the fifth day, He created the creatures in the water and the birds in the sky, and told them to be fruitful and multiply. On the sixth day, God created the beasts of the earth and all the creatures that move along the ground, according to their kinds, and finally He created man in His own image. He commanded the humans He created, male and female, to rule over the earth and keep it. Provided by the Bible History School. Genesis chapter 2, Garden of Eden. When God had created the heavens and the earth, and all that is in them, on the seventh day, He finished all His work and blessed it and made it holy. In the Garden of Eden, God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed life into him, making him a living being. He placed him in the garden to cultivate and keep it. In the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God commanded him not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God also created a woman as a helper for man, and the two became one flesh and lived in intimacy. This was the perfect order and harmony that God had created in the beginning. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis chapter 3. Adam and Eve. Genesis chapter 3 deals with the first act of disobedience and God's judgment. The cunning serpent tempts Eve to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the middle of the garden, which God had forbidden. Eve, shaken by the serpent's words, eats the fruit and gives it to Adam to eat with him. This opens their eyes and they realize their nakedness. So they make themselves skirts out of fig leaves to hide. God calls Adam and Eve, but in fear, they shift the blame to others. God's judgment falls on each of them. The serpent is cursed, the woman suffers the pain of childbirth, and Adam suffers a hard life. In the end, God expels them from the Garden of Eden and blocks their way to the tree of life. However, he also leaves behind a trace of his love by making clothes of skins for them. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 4. Cain and Abel. Adam and Eve gave birth to their first son, Cain. Eve was glad that she had received him through Jehovah's help and named him. Then the second son, Abel, was born, and he became a shepherd, while Cain grew up to be a farmer. As time went by, Cain brought the fruits of the land as an offering to Jehovah, and Abel brought the firstborn of his flock as an offering. Jehovah was pleased with Abel and his offering, but he did not accept Cain and his offering. Cain's face fell in anger, and Jehovah warned him to discipline himself. But Cain took his brother Abel out into the field and killed him. As a result, Jehovah cursed Cain and made him a wanderer on earth. However, he also protected Cain by giving him a sign that he would punish anyone who killed him. After that, Cain went east and had children and built a city. And his descendants expanded the world with different roles and talents. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 5. Adam's genealogy. Chapter 5 of Genesis shows the beginning of humanity and God's plan for creation through Adam's genealogy. God created man in his own image and blessed him by creating male and female. The genealogy that began with Adam continues with Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. Their lives are filled with God's blessings and companionship. And Enoch was a special person who walked with God and was taken up to God without experiencing death. The genealogy is more than just numbers. It symbolizes the flow of human life and grace in God's plan. Noah's birth conveys hope even amidst the curses and suffering of the earth, and heralds a new chapter in human history. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 6. The sin of man. When people multiplied on the earth and daughters were born, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were beautiful, and took them as wives. However, Jehovah said that man was only flesh, and would not live with them forever, and that he would set their lifespan at 120 years. When God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that the thoughts of his heart were always evil, he regretted that he had made man on the earth and decided to destroy him. However, Noah found favor with God, and was considered a righteous and perfect man in his time. God commanded Noah to build an ark, and Noah obeyed the command and prepared to preserve his life. The story of salvation through obedience and grace amidst man's sin, and God's judgment shows God's justice and mercy. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 7. The Great Flood. Noah and his family entered the ark according to God's command. Clean and unclean animals and birds of the air all entered the ark, according to their kinds, and God protected them. Then the windows of heaven were opened, and a great rain poured down on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. The fountains of the deep burst forth, and the waters rose and covered the whole face of the earth. All living things on earth perished under God's judgment, and only the ark rose above the water and began to move. The high mountains were also submerged, and all that had the breath of life perished. However, Noah, his family, and all living things in the ark were protected by God's grace. After 150 days, the water completely covered the earth. But only they survived and prepared for a new beginning. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 8. The flood ceases. After the great flood of the beginning, God remembered Noah and the creatures in the ark. God caused a wind to blow over the earth, causing the waters to gradually decrease. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the sky were closed, the rain stopped, and the land gradually began to appear. The ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, on the 17th day of the 7th month. And after the 10th month, the tops of the mountains appeared. Noah sent out a raven to see if the waters had dried up. But the raven, unable to find a place to rest on the ground, returned. He then sent out a dove, and when it returned with an olive leaf, he knew that the waters had decreased. When he sent out the dove again, it did not return, confirming that the land had dried up. So God told Noah, his family, and all living creatures to leave the ark and make a new start on the earth. Noah offered a burnt offering to the Lord and expressed his gratitude. And God promised that he would never curse the land again. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 9. God makes a covenant with Noah. When Noah and his family settled in the new land after the flood, God blessed them and told them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. He entrusted all living creatures to man and allowed them to eat, but told them not to eat the blood of life. God reminded them that he had created man in his own image, and emphasized that they should value life. After that, God said that he would make an everlasting covenant with Noah, his descendants, and all living things on earth. As proof, he gave them the rainbow, and promised that he would never again destroy the world with water. Noah and his family began a new life in this covenant, and the history of mankind continued in God's plan. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 10. Genealogy of Noah's sons. Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the ancestors of new mankind after the flood. Japheth's descendants continued as Gomer, Magog, Madai, and Javan, and their descendants settled in various places in the seaside land, and divided into various peoples and languages. Ham's descendants spread to Cush, Mizraim, and Canaan, and among them, Nimrod, the son of Cush, was called a mighty hunter before Jehovah and built great cities. Canaan's descendants spread to various peoples and lands, and their borders extended from Sidon to Gerar and Gaza. Shem became the ancestor of Eber, and his descendants continued as Elam, Arphaxad, and Aram. The descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth scattered throughout the world after the flood, forming new cultures and forming the foundation of human history. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 11. The Tower of Babel. When the whole earth spoke one language, people moved eastward and settled in the plain of Shinar. They made bricks, baked them hard, and used bitumen to build a city and a tower. They wanted to make the top of the tower reach to the sky, to make a name for themselves, and prevent them from being scattered over the whole earth. But the Lord looked down on their city and tower, and confused their language. They could not understand each other's language, so they were scattered over the whole earth and stopped building the city. So the place was called Babel, meaning the place where the Lord confused the language. Human pride eventually resulted in dispersion, and God's command was fulfilled. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 12. Jehovah speaks to Abram. Jehovah appeared to Abram and gave him a command that changed his life completely. Get out of your country, your relatives, and your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. Jehovah gave Abram a great promise. He promised that Abram would become a great nation, and that his name would be great. Those who bless him would be blessed, and those who curse him would be cursed. Abram obeyed the word and immediately set out, leading his family and possessions to the land of Canaan. There he heard Jehovah's promise again, and built an altar and worshipped Jehovah. However, because of a famine, he had to go down to Egypt, where he was in danger because of his wife Sarai's beauty. But Jehovah intervened directly and brought disaster on Pharaoh and his house. In the end, Pharaoh sent Abram, his family, and all his possessions back and ordered them to leave the land. Under Jehovah's guidance and protection, Abram continued his journey. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis chapter 13, Abram and Lot separate. Abram and Lot left Egypt and went up to the Negev with his wife and Lot. Abram had a lot of livestock, silver, and gold, and he returned to the place between Bethel and Ai, where he had previously built an altar. However, Abram and Lot had so much that the land could not support them together. And eventually quarrels arose between their shepherds. Abram suggested to Lot that they divide the land and leave to avoid quarreling. Lot chose the well-watered Jordan region and stayed close to Sodom. Abram, on the other hand, stayed in the land of Canaan and received the blessing of the Lord. God promised Abram this land and his descendants, strengthening his faith. Abram settled near the oaks of Mamre in Hebron and built another altar to the Lord and praised him. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis chapter 14. Abram rescue Lot. While Lot was living in Sodom, the 4 kings and the 5 kings fought a great war in the valley of Siddim. In the process, the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah were defeated, and all the wealth and people of the land, including Abram's nephew Lot, were captured by the enemy. Abram, who could not sit idly by, made a decision immediately and took 318 warriors, trained at home, and attacked the enemy at night. After a fierce battle, Abram returned with Lot, his wealth, and all the people. On the way back, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine and blessed Abram, giving glory to God. Abram offered 1/10 of all the spoils to Melchizedek and praised God's grace. And when the king of Sodom tried to compensate, Abram did not take even a single piece for the sake of God's name. This was the moment when Abram's faith and God's will were revealed. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis chapter 15. Jehovah makes a covenant with Abram. Abram hears the word of Jehovah in a vision and is comforted not to be afraid. Jehovah declares that he is Abram's shield and great reward. And when Abram laments that he has no children, Jehovah shows him the stars in the sky and promises that his descendants will be countless. Abram believed his words, and Jehovah counted it as righteousness for him. Jehovah also prepares a 3-year-old heifer, a female goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon for Abram, and performs a covenant ceremony. In the dark of night, a smoking brazier and a burning torch pass between the pieces of meat, confirming Jehovah God's covenant. Jehovah's promise to give this land to his descendants includes the vast land from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates, and it becomes an everlasting covenant established by God. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis chapter 16. Hagar and Ishmael. Abram's wife Sarai had no children, but she had an Egyptian maid named Hagar. Sarai told Abram to sleep with Hagar and have children. When Abram did so, Hagar became pregnant, and because of this, she began to despise Sarai. Sarai complained to Abram, and Abram left Hagar to do whatever Sarai wanted. When Sarai mistreated Hagar, Hagar fled to the wilderness. There, she met the angel of the Lord, and received comfort and a promise. The angel of the Lord told Hagar to return and obey, and promised to greatly multiply her descendants. Hagar gave birth to a son and named him Ishmael. This was to remember God's grace in hearing Hagar's suffering. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis chapter 17. Circumcision, a sign of the covenant. Chapter 17 of Genesis deals with the important covenant between God and Abraham. When Abram was 99 years old, God appeared to him, introduced himself as the Almighty God, and spoke of the covenant. God changed Abram's name to Abraham, and promised that he would make him the father of many nations. God also commanded that all the males be circumcised. as a sign of this covenant. Through this, he promised that the covenant would last forever. The promise was fulfilled when all the males in the household were circumcised. A symbolic act of remaining in a relationship with God. Abraham obeyed God's word and completely followed God's command by circumcising Ishmael and all the males in his household. This covenant became a sign of faith and evidence of the covenant. To live as God's people. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 18. Abraham is promised a son. Under the hot sun of midday, Abraham was sitting in his tent near the oak of Mamre. Suddenly, he saw 3 men standing opposite him. And he quickly went out to meet them. He humbly bowed down to welcome them, prepared food and water, and made them rest under the tree. While they were eating together, the people asked Abraham, "Where is Sarah your wife?" Abraham answered, "She is in the tent." And they said, "Sarah will have a son about this time next year." When Sarah heard this, she laughed to herself and did not believe it, for she was already old, and her periods had stopped. But Jehovah said, "Is anything too hard for Jehovah? Sarah will surely have a son at the appointed time." Sarah was afraid and denied that she had laughed. But Jehovah said quietly, "No, you did laugh." This encounter was a moment that gave new confidence to Abraham and Sarah's lives. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 19. The sin of Sodom. Genesis chapter 19 is a story about the sin of Sodom and God's judgment. In the evening, 2 angels arrived at Sodom. The 2 angels were welcomed by Lot, who was sitting at the gate. Lot invited them into his house, served them a meal, and let them rest. When night came, the people of Sodom came and made an impious demand. Lot earnestly tried to stop them, but they would not listen. The angels intervened to save Lot and his family. In the morning, the angels told Lot to hurry and leave the city with his family. Lot's son-in-law thought it was a joke. Eventually, Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters were led out of the city by the hands of the angels. They were instructed to flee and not look back. However, Lot's wife looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. At the same time, Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by fire and brimstone from heaven. This chapter 19 of Genesis should be a lesson in the righteousness and severity of God's judgment. It also teaches us the importance of faith and obedience in a world full of sin. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 20. Abraham and Abimelech, king of Gerar. Abraham moved to the land of the Negev and settled in Gerar, telling his wife Sarah that she was his sister. Abimelech, the king of Gerar, took Sarah away. But that night God appeared to Abimelech in a dream, and told him that Sarah was a married woman, and that he would die if he did not return her. Abimelech said that he had not touched Sarah. He appealed that he had acted with an honest heart and clean hands. God acknowledged his honesty and commanded him to return Sarah to Abraham. He also said that, if Abraham prayed for him, everything would be resolved. The next day, Abimelech explained the situation to his servants and Abraham and asked why. Abraham answered that he had said this because he was worried that the people would not fear God. After that, Abimelech returned Sarah and gave her a place to stay with much wealth. When Abraham prayed to God, God blessed Abimelech and his household and made them fruitful again. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 21. Sarah gives birth to Isaac. A wonderful thing happened to Abraham and Sarah. As the Lord had said, Sarah gave birth to a son in her old age. Abraham named him Isaac, and circumcised him 8 days after his birth, as God had commanded. Sarah was delighted, saying, "God has made me laugh. And everyone who hears will laugh with me." But the peace did not last long. When Sarah saw Hagar's son, Ishmael, teasing young Isaac, she became angry and told Abraham to cast out Hagar and her son. Abraham was troubled, but God advised him to follow his words, and said that he would fulfill his promise through Isaac. Hagar and Ishmael left for the wilderness. But God took care of them and promised to make them a great nation. In all circumstances, God faithfully fulfilled Abraham's family and his promise. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 22. Offering Isaac as a burnt offering. Abraham responded immediately to God's call, and he set out on a journey to prove his faith. God commanded Abraham to offer his beloved son Isaac as a burnt offering. Then he obeyed the word and headed to the land of Moriah. Arriving at the mountain with Isaac, Abraham built an altar, bound Isaac, and placed him on it. Then he lifted the knife to strike Isaac. At that moment, the angel of the Lord stopped him and acknowledged his faith and reverence. Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. He offered the ram as a burnt offering instead of his son. God greatly praised Abraham's obedience, and he promised his descendants blessings like the stars in the sky. He also declared that all the nations of the earth would be blessed through him. Abraham named that land Jehovah-Jireh, remembering what Jehovah had provided. Abraham believed in and relied on God until the end. The story of Abraham's loyalty and obedience has been passed down through generations. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 23. Abraham buys the cave of Machpelah. Sarah lived 127 years. And she died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Abraham was very sad and heartbroken because of Sarah. And he met the Hittites to prepare a burial place for Sarah. Abraham, revealing that he was a foreigner, asked for a place to bury the dead. The Hittites revered Abraham as a leader appointed by God, and they offered Abraham free use of any burial place he wanted. But Abraham asked Ephron, "Sell the cave of Machpelah for a fair price." At first, Ephron refused, offering to give it to him for free. But at Abraham's earnest request, he finally agreed to sell the land for 400 shekels of silver. Abraham paid the price immediately. Thus, he officially took possession of the land and the cave of Machpelah. He buried his beloved wife Sarah there. The land was confirmed as Abraham's burial property. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 24. Isaac takes Rebekah as his wife. Abraham was getting older. Abraham wanted to find a suitable wife for his son Isaac. He sent the most loyal servant in his household to the Nahor castle where his relatives lived. Abraham's servant arrived at the Nahor castle in Mesopotamia. The servant prayed at the well outside the city that he would find a suitable woman to be Isaac's wife. Then Rebekah appeared and gave water to the servant and his camels. The servant believed that this was God's guidance. He told her family the situation. Rebekah willingly accepted to become Isaac's wife. After receiving the blessing of her family, Rebekah left for Canaan. Rebekah, who first met Isaac in the field, was brought into his tent and became his wife. Isaac found comfort in Rebekah from the grief caused by the death of his mother Sarah. He was convinced that all of this was a journey of grace provided by God. Isaac and Rebekah formed a family in love under God's blessing. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 25. Abraham leaves the world. Abraham, as the patriarch of faith, lived his entire life according to God's will. After his wife Sarah left, he took a second wife, Keturah, and had new descendants. While he was alive, he separated Isaac and these descendants, and divided the property between them. Abraham, his life ended at the age of 175. Isaac and Ishmael buried their father Abraham in the cave of Machpelah. It was already the place where Abraham's wife Sarah was buried. Even after Abraham's death, God's covenant continued through his son Isaac. Isaac lived with his wife Rebekah in God's blessing. After that, their twin sons, Esau and Jacob, began a new story of conflict and faith. The story of Esau and Jacob led to another history. Abraham's life was a great journey that showed how God's promises and blessings were passed down to future generations. Provided by Bible History School. Subscriptions, likes, and alarm settings are a great help in producing Bible a Day chapter. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 26. Isaac dwells in Gerar. In the days of Abraham there was a famine in the land. And in the days of Isaac there was another famine. Isaac and his wife Rebekah moved to the region of Gerar. There he met Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. Then the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt, live in the land I will show you. I will be with you and bless you, and I will multiply your descendants." Isaac obeyed the voice and stayed in Gerar. However, Isaac was afraid that the people of the place would kill him because of Rebekah's beauty. So he said that she was his sister, not his wife. After some misunderstanding and conflict, King Abimelech called Isaac and rebuked him. But in the end he promised to protect Isaac and his family. Isaac continued to receive many blessings and achieve great success, becoming increasingly wealthy and powerful. The Philistines were jealous of this and filled in the wells that Abraham had dug. However, Isaac chose peace instead of fighting and dug new wells. As a result, he was able to enjoy leisure and abundance in a land free from conflict. One night, Jehovah appeared to Isaac again and said, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you." Isaac built an altar and praised the name of Jehovah. Isaac experienced the faithfulness of God in his life. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings will be a great help in producing a Bible a Day chapter. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 27. Isaac blesses Jacob. Isaac was old, and his eyesight was dim, and he felt that his death was near. He called his eldest son Esau and told him to bring him a delicacy made from game meat, and that he would bless him. However, Rebekah heard this and suggested that Jacob devise a plan to deceive Isaac. Jacob hesitated but followed his mother's instructions. Rebekah tricked Isaac by dressing Jacob in Esau's clothes and covering Jacob's smooth hands with goatskins. Isaac was suspicious, but eventually believed Jacob to be Esau and blessed him. When Esau returned and realized this, he was angry and blamed Jacob. However, the blessing had already gone to Jacob. Eventually, Rebekah devised a plan to protect Jacob. Rebekah advised Jacob to flee to the house of Laban, Jacob's maternal uncle, in Haran. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings will be a great help in the production of Bible a Day. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 28. Jacob dreams in Bethel. Jacob received the blessing of his father Isaac, and he left for Padan Aram at the command of his parents. During the journey, when the sun set, he decided to rest at a certain place. Jacob used a stone as his pillow and fell asleep. In his dream, Jacob saw a ladder reaching to heaven. In his dream, Jacob saw the angels of God ascending and descending. And the Lord stood above it and said, I am with you, and will give this land to your descendants, and will keep you. When Jacob awoke, he realized that this was the house of God, the gate of heaven. Jacob took the stone that he had used as his pillow, and set it up as a pillar. He poured oil on it and named the place Bethel. Jacob vowed, If God will protect me, I will give you 1/10 of all that you have given me. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings will be a great help in the production of Bible a Day. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 29. Jacob stays in Laban's house. As Jacob was on his way to Haran, he saw a flock of sheep at a well in the field. There he talked to some shepherds and asked about his uncle Laban. At that time, Laban's daughter, Rachel, was coming to the well with her sheep. When Jacob saw Rachel, he was attracted to her. Jacob himself went out, and moved the stone from the well, and watered her flock. Afterwards, he revealed to Rachel that he was Laban's nephew. And he suggested that they go together to Laban's house. Laban welcomed Jacob warmly. And Jacob stayed with him for a month. Jacob loved Rachel and wanted to marry her. Jacob promised Laban that he would work for him for 7 years in exchange for marrying Rachel. After 7 years, Laban used a trick to get Rachel's older sister Leah to be Jacob's wife first. In the end, Jacob worked another 7 years to marry Rachel. Jacob's house gradually became filled with children, and a new history began to unfold. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings are a great help in the production of Bible a Day. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 30. Rachel gives birth to Joseph. Leah and Rachel, as Jacob's wives, longed for love and acceptance through their offspring. Leah, by God's grace, gave birth to Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, and she felt joy and hope. However, Rachel was deeply saddened by her failure to have children. Rachel had Dan and Naphtali through her maid Bilhah. Leah also gave birth to Gad and Asher through her maid Zilpah. And the competition between the two sisters continued. In the meantime, God heard Rachel's prayer and finally gave her a son. Rachel named her son Joseph. Rachel thanked God and prayed for another son. In God's plan, the two sisters each grew their faith and hope through their own process. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings are a great help in the production of Bible a Day. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 31. Jacob leaves Laban. Jacob became anxious when he heard what Laban's sons said about Jacob. It was that Jacob had become rich by stealing their father's property. Jacob also sensed that his uncle Laban's attitude had changed. Jacob was commanded by God to return to the land of his ancestors. He called Rachel and Leah and talked to them. Jacob said that Laban had cheated him by changing his wages several times, even though he had worked faithfully for Laban. Nevertheless, God protected Jacob. Leah and Rachel also said that their father had neglected them, and that they would leave with Jacob. Jacob left secretly with his family and livestock. However, Laban found out and pursued him. God warned Laban not to harm Jacob. Eventually, Laban made a covenant with Jacob and parted ways peacefully. Jacob set out on a new journey, under God's protection and guidance. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings will be a great help in the production of Bible a Day. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 32. Jacob prepares to meet Esau. Jacob was filled with fear and apprehension when he learned that he would soon meet his brother Esau. As Jacob was traveling, God's angels met him and encouraged him. Jacob called that place Mahanaim. However, when he heard that Esau was coming with 400 men, Jacob was afraid. Jacob divided his men and his possessions into two groups. He prepared so that if one group was attacked, the other would survive. Jacob prayed earnestly to God for help. He also prepared and sent rich gifts ahead of Esau to appease him. After that, Jacob was left alone and wrestled with God all night long. God changed Jacob's name to Israel and blessed him. Jacob saw God's presence and named his name Peniel. His appearance of moving forward with trust and courage, even in his fear, shows his faith that relies on God's guidance. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings are a great help in the production of Bible a Day chapter. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 33. Jacob meets Esau. Jacob saw Esau coming with 400 men. So he divided his family into groups. He placed the maids and their children in front, Leah and her children behind. He placed Rachel and Joseph last. Jacob, who was walking in front, bowed to Esau 7 times as he went forward. Esau ran to Jacob, hugged him, kissed him, and wept together. Jacob introduced his family and said that it was God's grace. Esau tried to refuse Jacob's gift, but accepted Jacob's plea. Esau suggested that they go together. Jacob said that he would follow slowly, citing the slow pace of his family and livestock. In the end, Esau returned to Seir. Jacob stayed at Succoth and built a house and sheep pens, and he called that place Succoth. After that, Jacob pitched his tent in the city of Shechem in Canaan. He bought a field and built an altar, and called it El Elohe Israel. Jacob and Esau were reconciled and found peace under God's guidance. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings are a great help in the production of Bible a Day. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 34. Dinah is shamed. Dinah, the daughter of Leah and Jacob, went out to mingle with the daughters of the land. Then Shechem, the chieftain of the land, saw Dinah and took a liking to her, so he raped her forcibly. But Shechem fell in love with her, and wanted to take her as his wife. Shechem, along with his father Hamor, went to Jacob and asked for his hand in marriage. Jacob's sons were angry at this. They tricked Shechem and Hamor into making a condition that all the males should be circumcised. Shechem and Hamor accepted, and all the men of the city were circumcised. But before the wound could heal, Dinah's older brothers, Simeon and Levi, launched a surprise attack. They killed Shechem and Hamor and killed all the men in the city. After taking Dinah, they plundered the city's property and families. When Jacob saw this, he rebuked his 2 sons. However, Simeon and Levi claimed that it was the price they paid for insulting their sister. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings are a great help in the production of Bible a Day. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 35. God blesses Jacob. Jacob went up to Bethel according to God's word. He and his family threw away the foreign gods and purified themselves. And he prepared to build an altar to God. When Jacob arrived at Bethel, he remembered that God had been with him in the past. Jacob built an altar there and called the place El Bethel. God appeared to Jacob again, called his name Israel, and promised him great blessings. God said that many nations and kings would come from his descendants. He reminded him of the promise he had made to Abraham and Isaac. and said that he would give the land to his descendants. Jacob named the place Bethel to commemorate the place where he had met God. With his new name, Jacob was more firmly established as God's people. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings will be a great help and strength to the operation of Bible History School. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 35-2. Death of Rachel and Isaac. Jacob and his family left Bethel and headed toward Ephrath. As they neared Ephrath, Rachel suffered severe labor pains. The midwife told Rachel, who was in great pain, that she had given birth to a son. However, Rachel eventually died and named her son Benoni. Jacob continued Rachel's legacy by calling his son Benjamin. Rachel was buried on the road to Bethlehem, and Jacob erected a monument on her grave. After this, Jacob lived in the Tower of Ader, and his family continued to increase in that land. Jacob's final destination was Hebron in Mamre. Kiriath Arba was where Abraham and Isaac had lived. Jacob and Esau's father Isaac died at the age of 180. Jacob and Esau were one in heart and buried their father Isaac. Thus the story of one generation ended peacefully. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings are a great help and strength to the operation of Bible History School. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 36. The descendants of Esau and the kings of Edom. Chapter 36 of Genesis records in detail the genealogy of Esau, that is, Edom, and the kings of the land. Esau took the Canaanite women, Adah and Oholibamah, and Ishmael's daughter Basemath as his wives. They had many sons and descendants. Esau took all the wealth he had accumulated in Canaan and his family, and moved to Mount Seir. There he became the ancestor of the Edomites. Esau's descendants took possession of the land with the Horites, who lived in Mount Seir and established their rule. The genealogy of the kings who ruled in the land of Edom continued. It shows that God has given order and authority even in the history of the Gentiles. This proves that God is the one who rules over all nations and kingdoms. It shows that God's plan is being fulfilled, even in human genealogy and history. Provided by the Bible History School. Your subscriptions, likes, and notification settings are a great help and strength to the operation of Bible History School. Thank you very much. Genesis, chapter 37. Joseph and his brothers. Jacob lived in the land of Canaan, where his father Isaac had lived. Jacob especially loved Joseph, his son by Rachel. Joseph told his brothers about his dreams and hinted at his rise to fame. However, this made his brothers jealous and hate him. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to his brothers to check on their well-being. However, when the brothers saw Joseph, they decided to harm him. They did not take his life because of Reuben's persuasion. After throwing Joseph into a pit, they sold him to Ishmaelite merchants for 20 pieces of silver. They stained Joseph's clothes with goat's blood and brought them to Jacob. Jacob was overcome with grief, believing that his son had been torn to pieces by wild beasts. Meanwhile, Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 38. Judah and Tamar. Judah left his brothers and became close to Hira the Adullamite. Judah married the daughter of Shua the Canaanite and had 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. However, did evil in the eyes of the Lord and was put to death. Judah told his second son Onan to sleep with Tamar and succeed his brother's heir. However, Onan also did evil in the eyes of the Lord and was put to death. So Judah told Tamar to stay in her father's house until Shelah grew up. However, Judah did not give Shelah to Tamar, even though he was grown. Tamar took off her widow's clothes, put on a veil, and pretended to be a prostitute and slept with her father-in-law Judah. As a result, Tamar conceived a child by her father-in-law Judah. 3 months later, Judah heard that Tamar was pregnant and wanted to execute her. However, Tamar showed Judah's seal, cord, and staff as evidence of her pregnancy. Judah realized that these were his and admitted his mistake. In the end, Tamar gave birth to twins, whose brothers were Perez and Zerah. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 39. Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Joseph was sold to the Ishmaelites and went to Potiphar's house in Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph, and all he did was prosperous. Potiphar trusted Joseph and entrusted all his possessions to Joseph. However, Potiphar's wife tempted Joseph and asked him to sleep with her. Joseph firmly refused, trying to avoid the great evil of sinning against God. Potiphar's wife eventually falsely accused Joseph of trying to molest her. Potiphar was furious and put Joseph in prison. However, even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph. He was favored by the prison keeper and was put in charge of all the affairs of the prison. The Lord was with Joseph, and all he did was prosperous. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 40. Joseph interprets the official's dream. Joseph was still in prison. However, Joseph remained faithful, trusting in God's will in all circumstances. One day, the cupbearer and the baker of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, were thrown into prison. The two had dreams each at night. When morning came, Joseph asked them why they were worried. The two men said that no one could interpret their dreams. Joseph told them that the interpretation belonged to God, and told them to tell him their dreams. The cupbearer's dream meant that he would be restored to his position within 3 days. And the baker's dream meant that he would be executed 3 days later. And that was exactly what happened. However, the cupbearer did not remember Joseph after his restoration. Joseph still remained in prison. But Joseph continued to wait for God's guidance and moved forward silently. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 41. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams. Joseph was taken from prison to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and was asked to interpret his dreams. Pharaoh told him of 2 dreams and lamented that there was no one to interpret them. Joseph explained the meaning of the dreams, expressing his faith that God, not he, would interpret them. Joseph interpreted that the 7 fat cows and the healthy heads of grain meant 7 years of plenty. He also said that the lean cows and the dry heads of grain meant 7 years of famine that would follow the years of plenty. Joseph suggested a plan to store grain in preparation for the famine. Pharaoh was impressed by Joseph's wisdom and insight, and made him prime minister. He entrusted Joseph with all the affairs of the country, and put him in charge of all of Egypt. Joseph faithfully carried out his duties, and played a role in saving everyone during the famine that struck Egypt and the surrounding countries. Joseph confessed, "It is the work of God." This is a history that reveals God's providence and protection. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 42. Joseph's brothers go to Egypt. A severe famine struck the region where Jacob lived. Jacob told his sons to go to Egypt to get grain. Joseph's 10 brothers went down to Egypt, but Benjamin remained behind because of Jacob's concern. Joseph, who was the prime minister of Egypt, recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Joseph tested his brothers, calling them spies, and demanding that they bring the youngest son. Joseph's brothers were afraid, remembering the sins they had committed against Joseph in the past. Simeon was left behind in bondage, and his brothers returned to Canaan with grain and goods. They told Jacob everything. Jacob refused to let Benjamin go, and was deeply saddened. Amidst the growing guilt and tension, a new decision was needed. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 43. Joseph's brothers take Benjamin to Egypt. The famine in Canaan became increasingly severe. Jacob's sons prepared to go down to Egypt again to get food. But the condition was that they had to take Jacob's youngest son, Benjamin. Judah strongly persuaded his father Jacob that he would be their collateral. Jacob finally made up his mind, prepared a gift, and sent Benjamin down to Egypt. Joseph was delighted to hear the news of their arrival, and invited them to his home. Joseph held back tears when he saw his younger brother Benjamin, and shared a meal with his brothers. He gave Benjamin a larger portion, and had a good time with his brothers. However, Joseph's plan hidden in this meeting was about to be put into action. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 44. Joseph's silver cup found in Benjamin's sack. Joseph prepared a final test for his brothers. He ordered his steward to fill the sacks of his brothers with grain and money, and hide his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Early in the morning, the brothers set out on their journey. Joseph sent his steward to stop them, and tell them to look for Joseph's silver cup, which was missing. The brothers claimed their innocence, and volunteered to become slaves, if the silver cup was found. When the silver cup was finally found in Benjamin's sack, they were all shocked, and went back to Joseph, tearing their clothes. Judah offered to be a servant, in place of his younger brother Benjamin. Joseph was deeply moved when he saw the changes in his brothers. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 45. Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Joseph could no longer control his emotions, and burst into tears, sending his servants away. Joseph revealed himself to his brothers, and asked if their father was alive. His brothers were so shocked that they could not continue speaking. Joseph told his brothers to come closer, and told them that he was Joseph. Joseph explained that God had sent him here first to save many lives. He told them to bring their father and family to Egypt quickly, because the year of famine was still ahead. Joseph wept over his brothers and Benjamin, and they were reconciled. Pharaoh promised Joseph's family the good land of Egypt, and ordered them to prepare for it. His brothers returned to their father Jacob, and told him the news. Jacob did not believe it at first. But when he saw Joseph's chariot, he regained his spirit, and decided to go see his son Joseph. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 46. Jacob's family goes down to Egypt. Israel, or Jacob, arrived at Beersheba, with all his family and possessions. There Jacob offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. That night God appeared to Israel and said, "Do not be afraid, go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there." Jacob went down to Egypt with his family. Joseph reunited with his father in the land of Goshen, and hugged him affectionately and wept. Jacob was so happy to see Joseph again, that he was moved to the point of saying that he would be content to die. Joseph promised them that he would inform Pharaoh for the settlement of his family, and that he would prepare for them to live peacefully in the land of Goshen. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 47. Jacob's request to Joseph. Jacob and his family moved to Egypt because of a famine. Joseph took 5 of his brothers and went to Pharaoh to ask for permission to live in the land of Goshen. Pharaoh readily agreed, and recognizing their abilities, even entrusted them with the management of Egypt's livestock. Jacob blessed Pharaoh, telling him of his 130 years of hardship. As time passed and the famine worsened, the people sold their land and their bodies to obtain grain. Joseph gave the people seeds and had them cultivate the land. And they were to give a fifth of what they cultivated to Pharaoh. Meanwhile, as Jacob neared the end of his life, he made one request of Joseph. He asked that his body be buried in the tomb of his ancestors, not in Egypt. Joseph swore to his father Jacob that he would do so. Jacob worshipped God on his bed. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 48. Jacob blesses Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob was lying on his sickbed. When Joseph brought his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, he gathered his strength and got up from his bed. Jacob reminded Joseph of the blessings God had promised him in the land of Canaan. Jacob blessed Ephraim and Manasseh before them. He asked God to bless his children, as he had blessed Jacob's ancestors. Joseph wanted the greater blessing to go to Manasseh, the eldest son. But Jacob knew God's will. Jacob declared God's plan that Ephraim, the younger son, would be greater than the eldest son. Finally, Jacob concluded his blessing by promising Joseph and his descendants that God would be with them and would lead them back to the promised land. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 49. Jacob's will and death. Jacob called his sons together and blessed them for the last time, telling them what fate awaited them. He mentioned the character and conduct of each son and prophesied about their lives and future from Reuben to Benjamin. Jacob's blessings were sometimes full of praise and glory, and sometimes full of warnings and curses. He gave each son his share of blessings. Jacob gave instructions on where he would be buried when he died. He wanted to be buried with his ancestors in the cave of Machpelah, which is near Mamre. Finally, he lay down on his bed and died peacefully. Provided by Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing. Genesis, chapter 50. The death of Joseph. Joseph mourned the death of his father Jacob, kissing his face and deeply mourning. He had the doctors of Egypt embalm his father's body. All of Egypt mourned for Jacob for 70 days. Afterwards, Joseph asked Pharaoh and received permission to be buried in the land of Canaan, according to Jacob's will. Joseph held a grand funeral with his brothers, many others, and an escort of chariots and horsemen. Jacob was buried in the tombs of his ancestors, and Joseph returned to Egypt. His brothers were afraid that Joseph would resent them after their father's death. Joseph comforted them, emphasizing that God had used everything for good. Joseph, who lived to be 110 years old, believed that God would lead the children of Israel to the promised land. Joseph passed away peacefully. Joseph left a will instructing that his remains be taken to the land of Canaan. With that, we have finished the entire chapter 50 of Genesis. Next time, we will start with chapter 1 of Exodus. Provided by the Bible History School. Thank you for subscribing.